first myth is that diet doesn't have an impact on thyroid health. At least this is what most conventional medical doctors will tell you. A healthy diet is important for a healthy gut, and most immune system cells are in the gut. I want to start off by discussing the difference between nutrient deficiency and nutrient insufficiency. Nutrient insufficiency is not as bad as a nutrient deficiency, but still, you don't want either one. And a lot of people have either nutrient deficiencies or nutrient insufficiencies, or both, a combination. They might be insufficient in some nutrients, and other nutrients they might actually be deficient in. We need a healthy gut for healthy digestion and absorption, and a lot of people have gut issues. I will be discussing how nutrient deficiencies affect thyroid function. I'd like to talk about some of the essential nutrients for thyroid function. And I want to start off with iodine, because iodine is definitely controversial in the world of thyroid health. Too little is not great, but too much also is not a good idea. So another reason that you want to make sure you're not deficient or insufficient. So in this presentation, I will be discussing how nutrient deficiencies affect thyroid function. And I want to start off by discussing some of the common myths about diet and thyroid health. So the first myth is that diet doesn't have an impact on thyroid health. At least this is what most conventional medical doctors will tell you, including most endocrinologists. So without question, diet does have an impact on thyroid health. I mean, you need certain nutrients for optimal thyroid hormone production, which we'll discuss during this presentation. And also a healthy diet is important for a healthy gut, and most immune system cells are in the gut, and most thyroid conditions are actually autoimmune conditions. Most hyperthyroid conditions are Graves' disease. Most hypothyroid conditions are Hashimoto's. So myth number 2 is that you can't eat cruciferous vegetables if you have a thyroid condition. So the concern with cruciferous vegetables is that they're labeled as goitrogens, which means that they could inhibit thyroid hormone production. For most people, eating cruciferous vegetables such as broccoli, kale, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, these usually will not be a problem. Now, if someone's eating a massive amount of these cruciferous vegetables, like let's say if they're eating 5 cups of raw broccoli, maybe it will be a problem. Most people aren't doing that. Usually we see the opposite, where people aren't eating enough vegetables in general, including cruciferous vegetables. But yet most people with both hyperthyroidism and Hashimoto's can eat cruciferous vegetables safely. Again, in normal amounts. Massive amounts might be a different story, but if you're having a few servings of cruciferous vegetables per day, raw or cooked. Again, a lot of people eat them cooked, which is fine, but even raw cruciferous vegetables, I don't see a big problem with these and in those with thyroid conditions. So myth number 3 that I want to discuss is that a gluten-free diet alone can cure Graves' disease and Hashimoto's. So I recommend for all my patients, not just those with thyroid autoimmunity, but those with a non-autoimmune thyroid condition, to follow a gluten-free diet, at the very least while healing. Gluten can be a potential trigger, but also it can affect the permeability of the gut, which means it can cause a leaky gut. And so if you want to heal, it is important in most cases to avoid gluten. But that being said, just avoiding gluten alone usually is not going to restore your health if you're dealing with a thyroid or autoimmune thyroid condition. You usually need to do more, not only from a dietary perspective, but from an overall health perspective. It goes beyond the diet. I talk about this not only in my book, The Hyperthyroid Healing Diet, but in my book, Hashimoto's Triggers, and as well as my first book, Natural Treatment Solutions for Hyperthyroidism and Graves' disease. So all these books, I do talk about the diet. But even in my Hyperthyroid Healing Diet book, which focuses on diet, I have a section that talks about going beyond the diet. So next, I want to talk about how our modern diet contributes to these deficiencies. And I want to start off by discussing the difference between nutrient deficiency and nutrient insufficiency. And so nutrient deficiency is a severe reduction in nutrient levels. So, I mean, just well below the ranges, while a nutrient insufficiency is a mild decrease. And it's important to understand that both of them can cause problems. So nutrient insufficiency obviously is not as bad as a nutrient deficiency, but still, you don't want either one. And a lot of people have either nutrient deficiencies or nutrient insufficiencies, or both, a combination. They might be insufficient in some nutrients, and other nutrients they might actually be deficient in. And it's also important to mention that our diets, just we're eating food that's not as nutrient dense as it used to be. And then a lot of people still aren't eating organic food, and organic food, it's not perfect organic food, but more nutrient dense than non-organic food. So I would try to eat organic whenever possible. And then it's important to mention the role of gut health in nutrient absorption. So you need a healthy gut for healthy digestion and absorption. And a lot of people have gut issues. Sometimes it could be related to a gut infection, something like H. pylori, or a condition such as small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO. And so again, which isn't an infection, but too much bacteria in the wrong place in the small intestine. But both of these conditions can affect nutrient absorption, and having low stomach acid. Now, H. pylori does affect stomach acid production, but there are other potential causes of low stomach acid. And again, you need healthy stomach acid, you need healthy digestive enzymes for digestion and absorption. So just needed to mention the importance of gut health. So next, I'd like to talk about some of the essential nutrients for thyroid function. And I want to start off with iodine, because iodine is definitely controversial in the world of thyroid health. So it's it's like the Goldilocks principle. Too little is not great, but too much also is not a good idea. And I'm not anti-iodine. If anything, over the years, I've been more pro-iodine, but I have been more cautious over the years with iodine, at least as far as supplementation goes. And even when it comes to the diet, I'm not going to recommend for people to completely avoid foods with iodine. Some doctors do, even some endocrinologists, to their hyperthyroid patients, those with Graves, toxic multinodular goiter, they'll tell them to completely avoid foods that have iodine. So I think in most cases it's unnecessary to completely avoid the food sources of iodine. Now, in many cases, you might want to avoid really high sources such as kelp, for example, or eating a lot of shellfish, but eating a normal amount of iodine, eating some iodine rich foods, not only usually won't cause any problems, but I think it's important. I mean, iodine is a mineral. It's important. We don't want to become deficient or insufficient when it comes to iodine. Yeah, so I wanted to mention that about iodine. Again, supplementation, not saying there's never a time and place for iodine supplementation, but I'd be very cautious if you're going to supplement with iodine. I would work with a practitioner. But when it comes to food sources, like I said, I'm not suggesting to eat massive amounts of iodine through the food, but at the same time, I'm not going to recommend to completely eliminate food sources of iodine, or to even like severely restrict the iodine that you're getting from food. I wanted to also talk about iron. So iron is also important for thyroid hormone production, just like iodine. So you need healthy iodine to have healthy thyroid hormone levels. Same thing with iron. You need a healthy iron iron has other functions, just like iodine. Iodine also has other functions as well. Iron is important for the health of the mitochondria, which are the energy powerhouses of the cells. So if you're deficient or insufficient in iron, again, so that could affect thyroid hormone production, could also lead to anemia over time. And you can easily test for iron. So, iodine testing is a little bit more challenging. If you're going to test for iodine, I would say maybe a urinary iodine. But when it comes to iron, you could easily do an iron panel in the blood and look at iron, ferritin, iron saturation, total iron binding capacity, or TIBC. And you want to do the entire panel, because let's say, for example, you just look at ferritin, and ferritin sometimes will look good, but it can increase with inflammation. So if you see normal ferritin levels or even elevated ferritin levels, that does not rule out an iron deficiency. And unfortunately, some practitioners will just look at ferritin when it comes to iron. So definitely look at iron saturation, and selenium. So selenium, as well as zinc, I'll kind of mention both of those together. Those two minerals are very important when it comes to optimal thyroid health. Now, I will say selenium, there's a lot more research when it comes to selenium and thyroid health. And also not just, we're not here, I'm kind of focusing on the thyroid hormones. And next I'll talk about vitamin A, which plays a role in the thyroid receptors. And actually zinc also helps with that. But selenium, there's also a lot of research showing that selenium helps with the immune system, and some studies showing that it could actually lower thyroid antibodies. So another reason that you want to make sure you're not deficient or insufficient when it comes to selenium. And zinc also very important for immune system health. I mean, all these minerals and vitamins that I'm mentioning have multiple functions, and there's not just a single function. So vitamin A. So vitamin A, important for immune system health, also important to support the thyroid receptor. So you might have heard of insulin resistance, and insulin resistance is when there's too much insulin, but it's not getting into the cell. There's actually something called thyroid hormone resistance, which we don't see as commonly, but with thyroid hormone resistance, again, you have a lot of thyroid hormone. So on a blood test, you would see normal or higher levels of thyroid hormone, but TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, would actually be elevated, or it might be normal, but many times elevated. Whereas like most cases of hyperthyroidism, you see high T4, low TSH, but thyroid hormone resistance, you see both TSH and thyroid hormone on the higher side because the thyroid hormone isn't getting into the cell. Vitamin A is one of the nutrients of in this case, a vitamin that helps to support the receptor. I mentioned zinc could also be beneficial for the thyroid receptor. And then omega-3 fatty acids, also important for the receptor. And omega-3 fatty acids also important when it comes to reducing inflammation, which is important when dealing with all types of health conditions, especially autoimmune conditions such as Graves, as well as Hashimoto's, and also conversion. So getting back to some of these like iron, selenium, zinc, help with the conversion of T4 to T3. So that's also important to mention. So again, different nutrients have different functions within the thyroid world. Magnesium is important, has so many different functions. Magnesium also could play important role in thyroid health, but not just limited, of course, to thyroid health. And also helps a lot of people sleep. So if you have a sleeping issue, a lot of people are helped with magnesium. If someone has constipation, many times magnesium could help with constipation. So those aren't necessarily related to thyroid health, but just again, magnesium works miracles sometimes. If you are looking to do everything you can to save your thyroid, in addition to watching my videos on YouTube, you also might want to subscribe to my free online newsletter, which is called Healthy Gut, Healthy Thyroid. Not only will you get the latest news on how to heal your gut and restore your thyroid health, but during each edition, I'll demonstrate a different blood or functional medicine test marker that relates to healing your gut and or your thyroid. There will also be an Ask Dr. Eric section where not only can you see questions that other people have asked related to gut and thyroid health, but you can also submit a question for me to answer in a future edition. To subscribe to the Healthy Gut, Healthy Thyroid newsletter, please visit savemythyroid.com/newsletter. So vitamin D is more of a pro-hormone than an actual vitamin, but I did want to bring this up because vitamin D also is an important, again, I'll call it a nutrient, even though it's more of a pro-hormone, but it isn't important for thyroid hormone production, but plays a role in the immune system. And if you have Graves or Hashimoto's especially, you want to make sure you have optimal vitamin D levels above 50 nanograms per milliliter, or if you're overseas, then it would be 125 nanomoles per liter, I believe, minimum. That's like the least. Like again, you want it at least 125 nanomoles per liter, or again 50 nanograms per milliliter. So a little bit above that is good. Like when I do a vitamin D test, I like to see mine at least 50. If I see mine 60, I don't want to see too high, but if it's like in the 50s or 60s, I'm pretty happy. So when it comes to having deficiencies in certain nutrients, sometimes it's difficult to tell. And again, you could do some testing. I can't say every vitamin and mineral has a perfect test. I mean, I mentioned iodine, doing a urinary test, and even that's not perfect. I mentioned blood testing for iron, for magnesium and selenium and zinc. If you're going to test these, I actually like RBC magnesium, which looks at these minerals more from an intracellular perspective. There's a blood testing for omega-3 fatty acids. Vitamin D, very easy to test, doing a 25-hydroxy vitamin D test. And there are other tests out there, or companies like the Genova Diagnostics has their NutriEval, which is a test that looks at a lot of different things, including a lot of the nutrient deficiencies, including omega-3 fatty acids, as well as amino acids. But sometimes you could also go by symptoms. Again, you don't want to just rely on symptoms, but if someone's having brittle nails, brittle hair, mood swings, even things like joint pain, that could be a sign of nutrient deficiencies, just changes in the tongue. Again, just listen to your body. But like I said, you can't always go by symptoms. And also, a problem with going by symptoms is sometimes deficiencies, nutrient deficiencies that affect the thyroid could also affect other areas of the body. So, for example, someone might experience fatigue, and you could say, well, maybe you have a low thyroid. But the problem is, one, sometimes I work with people also who have hyperthyroidism, Graves, and I personally dealt with Graves' disease years ago. And I didn't personally experience fatigue when I dealt with Graves, but a lot of people with hyperthyroidism experience fatigue because it puts a lot of stress on the mitochondria. But then also adrenal imbalances can cause fatigue. Blood sugar imbalances can cause fatigue. If someone's in perimenopause, that also could sometimes lead to fatigue, weight gain, other symptoms, brain fog. So it could cause numerous symptoms associated with hypothyroidism. Yeah. So again, you can't just go by symptoms, like determining, okay, I have these symptoms, so I have these deficiencies. Ideally, you want to try to do testing. I mean, in some cases, like if someone is not eating fish, you probably have an omega-3 fatty acid deficiency, even if you're having other sources like walnuts, for example, or even grass-fed beef has some fatty acids. But if you're not eating fish on a regular basis, then you're probably deficient. But again, you could test. If you want to do an omega-3 index or a more comprehensive fatty acid panel, you definitely can do that. And then I'd like to briefly mention that certain factors can worsen nutrient deficiencies, like not just, obviously, not eating whole healthy foods can cause nutrient deficiencies. And I mentioned the impact of the gut. You need a healthy gut to have healthy digestion and absorption. But again, there are other factors such as medications that could affect nutrient absorption. And a great example, antacids and proton pump inhibitors, acid blockers. These can affect the absorption of minerals such as calcium, magnesium, and iron. So you want to be careful about certain medications. Environmental toxins and toxicants also affect nutrients, can deplete the body of nutrients. And the reason for this is because in order to detoxify, you have different phases of detoxification. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. You need nutrients, especially phase 1, phase 2 are nutrient dependent. So we live in a toxic world and we don't think about these toxins depleting us of nutrients, but they do. So the more toxins you're exposed to, and genetics also plays a little bit of a role in it as well. So, but in general, just because of our increased toxic burden, we do require more nutrients. And then stress, sleep deprivation can also affect nutrient absorption. I mean, when we're stressed, we're also using more nutrients, especially the B vitamins, vitamin C, when we're dealing with a lot of chronic stress. So again, and if you're not sleeping, that's going to affect these nutrients as well, just because it's going to affect the adrenals. And then also I need to mention certain diets like low calorie or restrictive diets, even intermittent fasting at times can have negative effect on nutrients, as well as thyroid health, just like ketogenic diets. Again, I'm not against ketogenic diet. There's a time and place for that. But if someone's following a ketogenic diet, or if they're doing some extreme intermittent fasting, this can have a negative effect on thyroid health. It could actually cause, in some cases, hypothyroidism, which is, if someone has hyperthyroidism, they might think it's a good thing. But you're also like the nutrient, we got to consider the nutrient aspect of that. So if someone's doing a reasonable intermittent fast, like if they're doing 16-8, and again, everybody's different. Some people 16-8 isn't a good fit, but if someone every day is going 18 to 20 hours, let's say, without eating, or doing a couple of 24-hour fasts per week, there's a decent chance over time you might become nutrient deficient. So I know there's a lot out there about intermittent fasting. I do some intermittent fasting myself, but the extreme intermittent fasting is not good from a protein perspective and also nutrient perspective as well. And AIP, autoimmune paleo diet, also you want to be careful with that too. I mean, the thing is with AIP, it's meant to be a nutrient dense diet. So if you're eating if you're a vegan and you're following AIP, then you're gonna probably become nutrient deficient or insufficient. If you're not vegan or vegetarian and you're eating meat, you're eating plant-based foods, again, it might seem restrictive, and it is restrictive, probably especially compared to what you're used to. But if you're eating healthy meats, if you're eating a good variety of vegetables and some fruits, you're probably not going to become deficient in nutrients, and especially if you're paleo. But even with AIP, again, that with AIP, the problem is some people will just eat the same foods, like same 4 or 5 foods day in, day out. And if you're doing that, you definitely can develop nutrient insufficiencies and deficiencies. So let's talk about how to replenish deficiencies. First, talking about some of the foods, the best foods for some of the nutrients. I'm not going to go over all the different nutrients, just some of the ones we mentioned here. So selenium. So selenium, Brazil nuts are a really good source of selenium. Now, if you're following, I mentioned AIP diet, autoimmune paleo diet, then you're not going to eat Brazil nuts because nuts are not allowed on an AIP diet. So you might need to supplement with selenium. And I do have patients supplement with selenium. It's common because, again, they're following an AIP diet. They might not be getting enough through the diet. Now, sardines are another good source. Not everybody eats sardines, but if you're eating sardines regularly, they're also really good for bone health, eating any fish with the bones. Sardines, good source of selenium. Iron, so iron, red meats, liver, chicken, organ meats, so really animal protein. Now, you could get iron from some plant-based foods, but the bioavailability isn't the same. So this is important to mention. So same thing even with other like calcium. I didn't really talk about calcium here, but calcium, like spinach is a high source of calcium, but it's not bioavailable. So if you rely on spinach, you're not going to get a lot of calcium. There are other even vegetables that are more bioavailable, such as collard greens and broccoli, for example, when it comes to calcium. Zinc, some good sources of zinc include beef and chicken. Now, I mentioned iodine, which again is controversial in the world of thyroid health, but as I mentioned, I don't recommend to completely restrict iodine from one's diet. I think if someone is following AIP diet, they could eat some fish, they could eat some seafood. Probably don't want to overdo it with the seafood. But again, if they have fish a few times a week, it should be fine. Now, again, that might not be enough to, as far as a fatty acid, omega-3 fatty acid perspective, maybe even from an iodine perspective. But fish is one source. Eggs are a good source of iodine. Dairy is a good source of iodine, but usually I'm recommending for people to avoid dairy. If someone's following AIP, they're avoiding eggs, but if someone's following a paleo diet, they're able to eat eggs, but they're still avoiding dairy. So fish, eggs, dairy, good sources. Dairy, again, I'm having people avoid dairy. Now there's sea vegetables, but again, you need to be careful with the sea vegetables. Some seaweeds are really high in iodine, kelp's really high in iodine. So just keep that in mind. I didn't mention tyrosine. Tyrosine is an amino acid that is important for thyroid hormone production. And so you get that through eating animal-based foods. I mean, you could take an amino acid supplement that has tyrosine too, but of course you want to try to get as much as you can from the diet. And so, yeah, I mean, try to get as much as you can through the food you eat. Now, while people are healing, I am more likely to give supplements, but that doesn't mean I'm going to like recommend all these supplements individually. It really depends on the person. But if someone is insufficient or deficient, they might benefit from taking selenium or supplementing with iron or, I mean, other minerals and vitamins. So again, just really depends on the person. But like I said, when healing, we want to make sure they're getting enough nutrients. And I'm not 100% sure they're going to be getting that through the food they eat while healing. Now, while someone is in a state of wellness, then definitely I recommend to rely more on food than supplements. And so for the most part, that's all I want to discuss. Do want to discuss some steps that you can take for long-term support. Of course, eating a healthy diet consisting of whole healthy foods, very important for not only helping to correct nutrient deficiencies along with maybe taking some supplements, but also to maintaining healthy nutrient levels. Eating home most of the time, cooking your meals, very important. If you're eating out most of the time or even like half the time, again, it's not ideal. And I mean, unless you have super healthy restaurants where you live. I know that's not the case where I am in Charlotte, North Carolina. Not, yeah, definitely not. There's not an excess. There's very, very few healthy restaurants where I live here. I mean, there's a few, but not as many as I like. But again, that's why we eat in most of the time. And then again, supplement whenever necessary. So I mentioned earlier, like a fish oil is an excellent example. Like I don't eat a lot of fish. I don't eat a lot of seafood. And so I need to take a fish oil because if I don't, I will be deficient. And I found that to be true with just about everybody. And the only way to prove that to yourself is to actually do a test. So you could do an omega-3 index test, which is a pretty inexpensive test if it's not covered by insurance. Even if you're eating fish, but let's say you're only eating it once a week or a few times a month, you're probably going to have a lower omega-3 fatty index. You want that to be at least 8%. And so some labs will say 4%, 4%, even 6% is too low. So 8%, 8 to 12%, I would say, is a good range. So you feel free to test that. But like I said, time and place for taking supplements. Yeah, so that's pretty much what I wanted to discuss. So again, you don't have to keep guessing why your body feels off. If you've been struggling with symptoms such as fatigue, if your digestion has been sluggish, you're having unpredictable cycles, even like aching muscles and joints, very well might be related to nutrient deficiencies, and you very well might want to dig deeper. And of course, I hope you continue to tune into my podcast, but since gut health is a key factor in correcting and preventing nutrient deficiencies, I also want to remind you about my Healthy Gut, Healthy Thyroid newsletter. I release a new edition every Sunday, and you can learn more by visiting savemythyroid.com/newsletter.